Hello, Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on YouTube. Your 2-11 Giants are in a bye week, the last possible bye week of the 2025 NFL season. Good chance for us to sort of reflect on what's gone wrong, what the future holds for the Giants, what changes are going to be made in the front office, the coaching staff, the roster, et cetera, et cetera. And here to help me figure it out is the woman with all the answers. That's Patricia Traina of Locked On Giants and Giants on SI. Patty, how you doing?
I'm good, but you know what? I just realized I didn't razz you much on my show. So I'm
Patty,
slipping.
you're slipping, you're falling down.
I fell asleep at the switch.
I'm sure I gave you opportunities.
You did too, and I'm thinking about it, and I'm
sure
going,
I did.
gosh,
So
I promised my listeners some razzing, and I didn't deliver.
No, you didn't.
Oh,
You didn't.
well.
It was disappointing. But Patty, so look, Patty, what are all the answers to figuring out what's wrong with the Giants? Just what are they? What are the answers?
Punt.
No, not on 4th and 1. When
Not
you're
on
down by
4th
20.
and 1. Are we on 4th and 1, or are we on 4th and forever?
Well,
No,
you know what? When you're on 4th and forever, and even 4th and 8, when you're down 20 some odd points with 7 minutes to go, and you punt, that's just not cool.
No, it's not. I mean,
punt.
There's just so many things wrong that we could talk about. I mean, seriously, do you have like all day? I know I don't, but maybe we need to reschedule to when we have all day, and we can run down the list of things.
What we'll do is we'll do like a whole week's worth of shows. We'll do like
We
a whole
might have
week's
to.
worth of shows.
We
Yeah.
might have to.
Anyway, let's try to boil this down to 25, 30 minutes. Figure it out the best we can.
Yeah.
Then we'll type it all up. We'll send it to John Mara.
I like he'll listen to us, right?
And he'll hire us as the GM, assistant GM.
Never mind that. I just want to get us back into the cafeteria for better lunches.
See, the reporters would be in better moods. It might be nice.
Sure.
It might
Maybe
be nicer.
Be nicer too. I don't know.
There you go. That's a start. That's a start.
But, seriously, I mean, this whole season, just when you think the Giants can't get any worse in a year, they go and they find a way to top themselves. And these are cracks that I think have been developing right from day one of this regime. And we could start with Joe Schoen.
Yep.
Joe Schoen, and you and I have talked about this before. Really good guy. I do believe he gets out there, he works, he doesn't sit on his butt. He goes to scouts and everything like that. But one of the biggest mistakes that he made is that he over evaluated, if you will, the state of the roster, that 2022 roster, thinking that it was better than what it actually was. And that knocked him off the maybe planned course of action he was going to take to build it up. Now, once you get, you go in a totally different direction and there's no turning back, now you have to kind of deal with the consequences. So they didn't address certain areas where they're still lacking. I mean, the run defense, they haven't figured it out in the 4 years that, Joe's been with the team. They do have their franchise quarterback, it would seem, but look at how long it took them to build up the offensive line. Special teams is still a problem. And, the other thing you can point to with Joe Schoen is that he makes the same mistakes over and over. Look at the kicker situation. You're going to run it back with Graham Gano, who was injured on IR 2 years in a row, had a high salary cap figure because he's the devil That's not good enough.
Right.
That's just not good enough. That you're going to trade for a Darren Waller who had an injury history and a significant injury history that was recent.
And I think, Patty, that you're talking about the 2022 roster, the Waller trade. I think even when Joe hints at having sort of strayed from what they believed in or the path that they wanted to take, I think he's going back to the way that they treated that offseason heading into 2023.
Yeah.
And that's the Waller choice. That's the Jones choice. That's the Barkley choice. That's that's all of it. The way that because I think they looked at that team and thought they were farther along than they
Exactly.
were. And you're right, they're still paying for that. Because they didn't address things in 2023 that they're still trying to address now.
Right. Throw in the drafting too. I mean,
Mhm.
he sits there. I think a year ago he was hanging his hat on his drafts. Well, go back and look. I mean, other than maybe for Jackson Dart, who shows promise, and by the way, not to throw cold water on this, but I always say give them a second year when the league catches up to them and has film on them. Are they still going to be as good as they were when they were catching the league by surprise? I think Jackson Dart will. Don't get me wrong, but it's kind of like also what happened with Washington. Now, I know Washington has injury issues this year, but I said give everybody a chance to catch up on what Dan Quinn and staff were going to do. And let's see if Washington is as good as it was in their first year. I say this all the time, and it was the case with the Giants. Brian Dable came in, new coaching staff. The Giants caught a lot of people off guard, and then they weren't able to replicate it. So there is a pattern there with, you can be optimistic, but it's got to be cautious optimism. And you can't hang your hat on, oh, well, we did so well in 2022. So, there's no reason to think we won't be able to build on it. And I think that is probably the biggest issue with Joe Schoen and what has set this franchise back, because it affected draft strategy, maybe some free agency strategy. And oh, by the way, why are you holding on to guys who are clearly not working out when you could be devoting roster spots to other positions where you are lacking?
Absolutely, Patty. The GMs, Jerry Reese did this. Going back that far, there were guys on that roster under Tom Coughlin with Jerry Reese as GM. There were guys on that roster Tom Coughlin didn't want. You and I both know that. They were on that roster because Jerry drafted them, and come hell or high water, he was keeping them on the roster. And it's almost the same way with guys like Jalen Hyatt, with guys like Evan Neal, with guys like Eric Gray, who's, some of these guys, Tay Banks at this point. There's just, they're taking up roster spots that in Tay Banks's case, you've got a really, really good kickoff returner for a first round draft pick, and that's not good enough. But one thing I wanted to say or ask you about before we get off the Joe Schoen topic. I've seen a lot of comments, the press conference the other day was live streamed. So a lot of people saw it. Okay. And there have been a lot of comments and questions that I've been getting about, oh, it was so embarrassing and all the things that he said. And look, I went back and I read his bi-week transcript from a year ago. And there are phrases and entire long sections of that press conference from last year that are verbatim what he said this year. Absolute verbatim. It's like it's the Joe Schoen playbook. But look, people are saying, oh, he said, I understand the question so many times, and it was so embarrassing that he should be fired just for that press conference. And I just think, look, the press conference has nothing to do with it. The only thing he was going to say that would have made anybody happy was, I'm resigning as GM effective immediately. The press conference has nothing to do with it. The body of work is what will be judged, and whether or not ownership truly believes he can fix it.
Yeah, I mean, look, was the press conference something of a disaster? Yes. I mean, it was uncomfortable. You could see he was uncomfortable, but the questions that were asked had to be asked. You can't sit there and sugarcoat it. And, enough's enough. And I think Joe is smart enough to know that he hasn't done a good enough job. I mean, the record speaks for itself. But, the bigger question is now, how do you fix it if you are given the opportunity? And I'm not so sure, despite, that announcement that came out from ownership, I'm not so sure if Joe Schoen is going to get that opportunity to fix it because, again, we talked about this on my show. If you go back and you look at the wording of that announcement, Joe Schoen is going to lead the search. Well, Joe Schoen's been vetting guys. He's been putting together lists. He mentioned, he's gotten some calls from people who maybe aren't currently employed who might be interested in the position. He's starting to put together a list because right now, John Mara, as everybody knows, is dealing with cancer. He is not in a position to go and do the vetting himself. Steve Tisch, he's going to have a say in who's hired, but he doesn't really get involved in the vetting process. So that falls on Joe Schoen to kind of do the groundwork, the initial groundwork. Now, whether Joe Schoen continues that, remains to be seen. Or do they decide at the end of the year, okay, you know what, Joe, this isn't working out. So we're going to let, and I know this is going to, turn some people's stomachs, but it is what it is. We're going to let Chris Mara and Tim McDonald, who, by the way, are part of ownership. Everybody screams fire them, but they are part of ownership. We're going to let them take over, the search, not just for a head coach, but for a GM.
Right. Patty, here's a scenario that I don't think we talked about. All right. We've talked about the idea that the Giants need or would benefit from a head coach that not just, I don't want to say a retread, because a retread is Pat Shurmur, a guy that didn't have any success and had no real background of winning. But we've talked about the idea that the Giants need a head coach who maybe hasn't got a Super Bowl ring, as a head coach, but a guy that's been there, done that, has won games, has credibility, knows what a good winning organization looks like and feels like and what the culture looks like. And I've been thinking about this whole idea of coach and GM coming in together. Okay. But there are examples. Les Snead with the Rams is an example. Even Chris Ballard in Indianapolis has had success with different head coaches. George Patton in Denver had 3 losing seasons before the Broncos hired Sean Payton as head coach, and things have turned around there. What do you think of the idea of hiring a head coach who's got some experience? And I don't know who the guy is, but hiring a head coach who actually gets personnel control, who Joe actually works for.
That would be an interesting scenario. I don't think the Giants have ever done that.
I don't think they have either. But
I mean, people say, oh, the GM hires the head coach. The only GM in Giants history who had total autonomy and total control over everything football was George Young. Not even Ernie Accorsi had that kind of control. I don't know if a lot of people know that, but I know that for a fact. I don't know that John Mara would sign off on that, but that being said, again, the man is dealing with much bigger issues right now. And, but here's the problem as I see it, Ed. The thing with the way the Giants are currently set up, as I understand it, there are too many voices in the process, all right? You've got Shane, you've got Brandon Brown, you've got Dennis Hickey, you've got Chris Rossetti, you've got Tim McDonald. You've got a lot of voices who are giving their opinions. And sometimes that's not a good thing because everybody's going to have a different opinion. And then how do you as decision maker wade through all that and prioritize what opinion you're getting? Sometimes a smaller circle is better. And, I chalk that big circle up to the fact that Joe is, when he came in here, he had never been a GM before. So it's kind of like, okay, you've never been a head coach before, so you surround yourself with guys who have done it. Mm-hmm. And I can't help but wonder if that has contributed to maybe the muddying, if you will, of the direction the Giants have gone with some of their personnel stuff. So to your question, I would say get somebody in here who has done it, because as it has turned out, the combination of a first-time GM and a first-time head coach was not a good combination.
You're saying get somebody in here who's also done the GM job before as well.
And who has had success with it.
Yeah, and that's I don't know who that is at this point, but that's an interesting scenario. The thing that I would say about Joe is I think Joe is a smart guy. I think he's also a stubborn person, and I think sometimes he lets his stubbornness and his ego get in the way a little bit.
Mhm.
But I also think, I've said for a long time, the Giants are the only franchise in the NFL with two family ownership. Okay. And I think that the entire structure with two owners who may not always have the same goals, the same opinions, the same visions is part of the problem. But we always get into, as you said, there's so many voices, and some of those are family voices, and the whole picture is muddy. And one of the things that fixed the Giants back in the 1980s was a strong GM who said, these decisions are mine. All right. These decisions are mine. And, it was set up that way from the beginning. And I don't think Joe has ever been that guy who said, this decision is mine. I don't, you guys can all have your opinions over here. This decision is mine. And because he always says, oh, it's an organizational decision. And that means it's muddy. Like you said, it's muddy. There's a lot of voices in it. And it might be, you might have been the head coach who pushed for something. It might have been Tim McDonnell. And it's sort of like, navigating the politics of all of it. And that's not a good way to run an organization. I think bottom line is I think the Giants as an organization have lost their way.
Yeah, I mean, look, I get it. Everybody has an opinion, but the more opinions you have, the more muddy the waters become.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's why I say get somebody in here who has done it before. I don't know who that person is, or somebody who isn't going to necessarily give in to, Tim McDonnell said I should do this and Chris Mara said I should do that, so maybe I should listen to them because they're my bosses.
And that's
part of the problem.
That's the weird part about having family in the front office, Patty. That is the weird part about having family. But it is
what it is, Ed.
It is what it is. Yeah.
It's not going to change. Everybody who says, oh, they should get rid of them, they're part ownership. I mean, you can say it until you're blue in the face. It's not going to change.
Patty, I had this idea the other day, and I haven't written it. This will be the first time I mention it. I'm going to throw it out there. If you want to replace Joe Schoen, and you just voiced the idea of bringing in a GM that's had success before, what about the other path? We've been talking about this whole family influence thing with the Giants. What about the path of just making Tim McDonnell the GM and stop it and not hiding this family influence anymore? What about that?
No. Now you're going to have a Jerry Jones situation, because what happens?
Yeah, you are. But
what happens if things don't get better? How do you fire him?
Right. Yeah.
I disagree with that. I mean,
I'm just throwing it out there. Yeah.
No. Yeah. I get it. I mean, you can't rule it out. But do you really want to go down that path? Because how do you fire a family member from a position?
Right.
It just doesn't happen. It rarely happens.
Right.
I don't see that being the best way. But that being said, here's the other factor, Ed. What good potential GM candidate, knowing that, you have to deal with all this stuff, is going to want to come here and say, all right, I can work within the parameters. I mean, George Young, if I remember correctly, when he was first recommended by then Commissioner Pete Rozelle, made it crystal clear. He said, if I'm coming in and taking this job, I want total control, no outside influence. I don't care what, Wellington says. I don't care what at the time it was Tim Mara. I don't care what he says. I don't care what Chris Mara says, Frank Mara says. I get total control. No GM has had that since. And, Ernie, of course, he was able to make it work
Hmm.
for a number of years. But since then, think about it. Jerry Reese didn't have it. Dave Gettleman really didn't have it. Joe Schoen hasn't had it. So, I mean, I don't know if there's a
Yeah.
solution other than for, John to say, hey, guys, back off, but
Right.
I don't see that happening.
Right. And that's again, you're dealing with family and it's a hard situation, but you're I just don't see, I see Joe as a smart guy, but maybe not a quote unquote strong GM.
I agree.
Yeah. Anyway, Patty, let's talk about something else. Let's talk about the Jackson Dart debate. Um Look, I get it. I get the fact that everybody's concerned about Jackson Dart. I get the fact that everybody wants him to learn to protect himself. But my question for you is not, are you worried about him? We talked about that on your show. Um, my question really is, has the Jackson Dart debate sort of jumped the shark? Has it gotten to the point of hysteria where it's too much? Where it's just everybody just needs to quiet down a little bit, let the kid play, let the kid learn, let the kid be what the kid is, and let the coaches coach the kid. I'm wondering if maybe the hysteria over his play style is just too much and maybe counterproductive.
Yes and no. I'm going to say it is because, the season is going down the tubes or has gone down the tubes. And he's really the only thing worth tuning into, given the state of the roster. But no, in terms of he's got to be smart. He is hopefully the future of this franchise. You do not want this guy being a one and done quarterback where, heaven forbid, he goes and he takes an unnecessary hit and now his career is ruined. This is it kind of, it's almost like the Odell effect in a way. Remember when Odell came in, he was the Giants. The Giants were so bad. Odell was the Giants. That's why people tuned in. And then, the injuries started happening. Then they got rid of him. And really, fans were like, well, why bother tuning in? The team's not good enough. Jackson Dart has a chance to be the face of this franchise. He is the face of the franchise, I think, right now.
Mm-hmm.
He is the one reason why I think a lot of people tune in. So when he goes and he says, the heck with you, I'm going to play my game the way I played it. I played it this way in high school and college, pee-wee football. This is football. This isn't soccer. I'm going to get hit. It's cool. Okay. It's like you admire him because he's not afraid to get hit, but there's a very fine line between being brave and being stupid. And I think some of the times he crosses that line.
Yeah, the other part of that, Patty, and like I said, I think there's been too much outside hysteria to the point where I think that let the coaches coach, let the coaches deal with it. But the problem is if he's getting that message to protect himself a little bit more often, and if the coaches are pointing out this was a situation where the prudent course would have been step out of bounds, or the prudent course would have been, get down instead of take this hit or that hit, and he's ignoring it, intentionally ignoring it, that's a problem too.
Mm, it is. I mean, again, I admire the competitive spirit. I admire his moxie, but you've got to be smart. And I don't know if it's just he's still kind of feeling his way and learning that the athletes he is facing at the NFL level are not like what he faced in college and in high school.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's just a learning process. Maybe it's just, it's interesting. We did in our weekly player reviews that Bob Folger does on SI. He broke them up, and I thought this was kind of really clever on his part. Youth is wasted on the young. And sometimes when you're young, you think you got all the answers, and you don't. And then by the time you figure it out, obviously, you're older and maybe you don't have the energy or the strength to do what you once did. Jackson Dart, I believe, is going to figure it out. He's going to have to. I mean, look, he hates missing practice. He hates missing games. But is it, he's got to ask himself at the end of the day, is it worth it for me to take on all these hits and risk losing playing time and practice time when my teammate needs me? That's what he's got to ask himself. I mean, there's a time and a place for it, but to do it on every single run, regardless, that's not smart.
I mean, there is a certain amount of protecting him that you can do with your play calls, but
right. And there were no design runs, but I mean, not that he ran a lot. He only ran 4 times, but none of them were design runs.
Right. It's football, and you're going to have to break the pocket. You're going to have to take a hit. You're going to have to, you're going to have to make plays sometimes. But part of that is maybe learning when is the right time. And the other part is maybe, get him some wide receivers who can get open.
Yeah.
Get him a defense that can stop some people so he doesn't feel like he has to be a hero and drive the Giants for points every single time they have the football. And, build a team around him that makes him feel like he doesn't have to do everything himself.
Yeah, absolutely. And, look, part of that right now, he's missing his top receiver. He's missing his top running back. I get it. Maybe he feels a little bit more pressure to get the team over the hump. But on the flip side, again, what good is it going to do if you take a hit and now you've got to miss 2 or more games because you took a hit because you were, well, I'm going to run the way I want to run. I mean,
right.
that's
there are going to be injuries that happen because it's football. All right. But you want to try to avoid those when you can. Eli Manning used to look silly sometimes when he would just curl up into a ball in the pocket when he would see that a play was over. Tom Brady used to do the same thing. I said this the other day. Dart talks a lot about Patrick Mahomes, who's the same size, basically same build, as Dart taking hits. But Patrick Mahomes has learned nobody ever gets a clean shot at Patrick Mahomes.
Right.
In the field of play. And the thing that Patrick Mahomes has learned, or that defenses have learned about Patrick Mahomes, is you don't touch Patrick Mahomes near the sideline, for the simple reason that Patrick Mahomes has mastered the art of selling the hit on the sideline. Even when he's not hit that hard, he's mastered the art of selling that hit. And he'll occasionally get the penalty flag, even if it's not deserved. And teams know that. So nobody touches Patrick Mahomes on the sideline. And Jackson Dart, the thing he might want to learn from Patrick Mahomes is that.
Yeah.
So and maybe that just comes with time. Patty, I want to ask you about one more player. I got to ask you about Abdul Carter. Your thoughts on what's been going on with Carter. Your thoughts about whether or not what's going on with Carter is the Giants' fault, and whether you're worried about Carter long term.
I think Carter, if I'm not mistaken, came into the league. There were some concerns about his, off-field, a sense of entitlement, maybe. Obviously, I don't know. I mean, I didn't do any vetting on that, but I remember reading that. But if there were, they haven't been corrected. Carter, look, the other day when Joe Schoen spoke, he said he's 21 years old. He made a mistake. Once is a mistake, twice is a pattern. And Albert Breer of SI reported, which, I confirmed, that this has been a pattern with him where he has shown up late for meetings, and Brian Dable, before he was fired, would fine him and they would keep it hush hush. Well, sometimes you got to take it and just come right out and say, look, this is not acceptable. Mike Kafka, in the 2 times now that this has happened under his watch, when has he come out and said this is not acceptable? He's just said it's my decision. It was a coach's decision. Call him out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, look, Abdul Carter, he's 21 years old. I get it. He's young, but he's also an adult. This is a job. All right. He's been in this job since what, April, the end of April? So I don't want to hear that, oh, he didn't know what time the practice was, when there are boards all over that facility telling you when to show up for practice, what time the practice is, what the day's schedule is. I don't want to hear that, oh, he wasn't sure if he was supposed to be in a special teams meeting because some weeks he is and some weeks he's not. If you're not sure, don't you think you owe it to yourself to ask? Don't you think, you know, I don't want to hear that, oh, you know, it was a mistake, or his teammates shouldn't have to baby him. He's a grown man at 21. Yes, he's young, but he's a grown man. So he's got to take responsibility and stop with this, oh, you know, I didn't know the schedule. No, I'm sorry. That's not an excuse. You're being paid as a professional. And, you know, you made this point, and I agree with you. You made this point on my show. The other day when he was sitting on the bench, when he was benched for that first quarter, and he's sitting there in his jacket looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, that was a bad look.
Completely
really
disinterested. Yep, completely disinterested.
I mean, and you know, it's interesting. I think Carl Banks made the same point, for what it's worth. Get up there, stand up, be attention, be engaged. And he just sat there the whole time, from what I understand. So, I mean,
if nothing else, watch the Patriots offense. Try to learn something you can use when you get in the game.
Right. And even if you're watching, you know, even if you're making the excuse, well, the Giants defense was on the field, or I'm sorry, the Giants offense was on the field. So, you know, maybe you learn something by watching the Patriots defense that you can pick up and incorporate into your game. There's value to watching both sides of the ball if you're on the sideline and not engaged, not actually active in the game.
Just look interested in the outcome of what's happening on the field.
It was a bad look. And, you know, Carter, afterwards, you know, his attitude when he said, you know, stuff happens. Of course, he didn't say stuff, but and I'm sitting there going, dude, really? That's your excuse?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was just a bad look overall.
Bad look. Patty, we have 4 games left. 4 games left to deal with this. And we'll see if the Giants win a couple of them. Anyway, I'm sure we'll have you back on the show a couple times between now and the end of the season, and a few times in the off season. So appreciate the time as always. And Giants fans, thank you as always for watching. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.